and we'll get started. So thank you all for joining us for this session. It's nice to see a few familiar names in the list of attendees. My name is Patrick Hastings. I am an education outreach specialist here in the Rare Book Division at the Library of Congress, and I'm excited to share with you all some primary source material related to Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet as it was put on stage and put in print for about 150 years. So I'm just coming up on my 1-year anniversary of working here at the library, and this was one of the first digs into the stacks that I had, where I was asked to put together a display for an educator's open house, and I thought, well, Romeo and Juliet might be a good hunting ground for trying to identify some sources and that teachers might find interesting to look at. And I got a lot more than I bargained for as I kind of poked around and saw all these different versions of the play that were not what I was expecting to find. So I'll get into that in a minute. But let's see. Are we in, let's see, presentation. So are you all seeing my presentation screen?
We are seeing your presentation, and we are seeing the thumbnails on the left, which I think is okay. But
that is not how I want.
You might want to click on the slideshow tab at the top.
Yeah, I did, and I think it's still on the other. So here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna stop sharing real quick, and then I'll share again and go here. How about that?
Right now it's okay. Now it's full screen. You're good.
Okay, great. All right. So, brief overview of the topic here is that in 1748, David Garrick wrote and staged an alternate version of Romeo and Juliet. And this, for around 150 years, is the version that was preferred over Shakespeare's original play, both on stage and in print. The library's collections has no fewer than 7 editions that include the Garrick version of the play, not the Shakespeare's version. And most editions include some sort of prefatory note or editorial introduction that explains and defends the choice from these different printers and publishers to include the Garrick version. And those will be the primary source that we'll spend the most time with here for the purposes of this festival. So these primary sources, I think that they are pretty interesting as they kind of chart the changing attitudes toward Shakespeare, toward what we in our current era, and we really for the past 100+ years have as like an aura of the author and the fixed nature of any text, kind of what becomes canonized and sacred and untouchable, and is that a uniquely contemporary kind of sensibility towards the text. So the first thing we'll do is we'll compare Garrick's alteration to the ending of Romeo and Juliet. And we'll look at that in comparison to Shakespeare's original text and how the tomb scene goes in the original text. We'll examine some passages from these prefatory notes or editorial introductions that are these primary source materials. And we will then discuss how the inclusion of these primary sources might impact a unit on Shakespeare. And then I'm happy to open it up to question and answer after we get done with those couple objectives there. So David Garrick spent 29 years as the manager of the Theatre Royal in Drury Lane in the West End of London. Under his leadership, this theater achieved acclaim as one of the leading theaters in all of Europe. He was an accomplished actor and director, and is credited with many innovations in terms of set design, costumes, special effects, He and those kind of skills as an actor and director are what ultimately lead him to be buried in Poets' Corner in Westminster Abbey. And this is his kind of tomb in Poets' Corner. But he was not celebrated as a playwright, was in fact kind of considered a weak playwright, which makes it all the more ironic that his edit and altered text, that he was the one who decided to edit Shakespeare, that he applies his hand, even though he was not well regarded as a playwright and writer himself. So we'll kind of dig into that. So that's David Garrick, who is the man who writes this altered version of the text. So in the original Shakespeare, in the tomb scene, Romeo arrives. Obviously, he kills Paris, so forth and so on. He gets to Juliet, sees her lying in her, what he takes as being her death in the tomb, and gives a pretty impassioned speech, takes the poison and says, "O true apothecary, thy drugs are quick, thus with a kiss I die." He dies. Friar Lawrence then enters. Just, I'm trying to refresh everybody's memory. I'm sure most of you are very familiar with the text, but just to have as a basis of comparison. Friar Lawrence is the one who enters, sees Romeo dead, sees Paris dead, sees Juliet, and she wakes. And this conversation occurs between Friar Lawrence and Juliet, where she asks, "Where is Romeo?" He hears a noise and leaves. And then we have Juliet's discovery of Romeo and the fact that he has poisoned himself. And she kisses his lips, hoping that she can get some of the poison, can't, finds his dagger, kills herself, and dies. So that's how it is in the Shakespeare original text. In David Garrick's altered deathbed scene, his version of the tomb, we have up, let's see if you can see, up here, we have him similar language Garrick retains from Shakespeare in this final conversation. And, same sort of, arms take thy last embrace and eyes look your last, and then drinks the poison. And then instead of dying immediately, as the "O true apothecary, thy drugs are a little bit less quick" in the Garrick version, he remains alive as Juliet wakes. And in these initial lines, Juliet's a little bit groggy as she emerges from kind of the fog of her kind of catatonic near-death state. "Where am I? Defend me." Romeo gets excited and says, "She speaks, she lives, and we shall still be blessed. My kind propitious stars overpay me now, for all my sorrows past rife. Rise, rise, my Juliet." Of course, the long S here in the original, in these texts, the Fs that look, or the S's that looks like Fs. "Rise, rise, my Juliet, and from this cave of death, this house of horror, let me, quick, let me snatch thee to thy Romeo's arms." What people think at this point is that Garrick has, his intention is that Romeo has forgotten that he's just taken the poison and is overcome with happiness and bliss at seeing Juliet still alive. He starts leading her out of the tomb, and she doesn't recognize him at first, and then is so happy to have him back. And then at a certain point down here, going to embrace him, "Dost thou avoid me, Romeo? Let me touch thy hand." This is where he starts to either feel the effects of the poison or starts to recognize the calamity that's about to unfold, that he has poisoned himself. It's kind of simultaneous. He realizes what he's done as the poison begins. He says, "I have no strength, but want thy feeble aid, cruel poison. Poison, what means thy lord? Thy trembling voice, pale lips and swimming eyes, death's in thy face." Romeo says, "It is indeed. I struggle with him now." And then it gets really quite melodramatic. You can tell just by the number of dashes here on this last page. The disjointed syntax. He's dying out on stage in conversation with Juliet. She's witnessing the poison take its effect, and he dies. It's all kind of melodramatic and choppy as he's losing his life. So this is what the 67 line inserted scene in the end of Romeo and Juliet is what Garrick supplies on stage and to the reader. So what's interesting I think from a primary source standpoint is to look at these prefatory notes that are that people feel compelled over the course of about 140 years to offer to the readers to give some sort of explanation for what they're doing. So in David Garrick's own what he calls an advertisement, we have a couple different kind of notable moments. So he begins by saying, "The chief design of the alterations in the following play was to clear the original as much as possible from the jingle and quibble, which were always the objections to the reviving it." So this is, again, a very different sensibility to what we maybe have today towards Shakespeare in terms of kind of our reverence and kind of appreciation for the genius of Shakespeare and the untouchable genius of Shakespeare. Here he is making reference to the fact that this play, Romeo and Juliet, hasn't actually not been put on stage for some time. There was a playwright named Thomas Otway who wrote kind of an adaptation, kind of a different version that was rooted in Romeo and Juliet and the source texts that Shakespeare was using. So between 1701 and 1735, this play, which is called Caius Marius, is performed 31 times in London, and Romeo and Juliet is not performed a single time in those same 35 years. So just the fact that David Garrick has revived Romeo and Juliet and put it on stage. He is saying that there were objections to reviving it, to putting Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet on the stage. And some of those objections are the jingle and quibble, which if you look at the edits that Garrick makes to the text, often he removes Romeo's rhymes. Romeo's like kind of a frequent rhymer. So I think that's the jingle. And then quibble are some of the extraneous kind of bits. One of which is the character of Rosaline. Rosaline's as Romeo's initial love interest, Garrick removes entirely from his version of the play. So he says, "The sudden change of Romeo's love from Rosaline to Juliet was thought by many as the first revival of the play to be a blemish in his character. An alteration in that particular has been more in compliance to that opinion than from a conviction that Shakespeare, the best judge of human nature, was faulty." So there's a little bit of having it both ways in this, kind of note that Garrick is offering. He's saying that many believe that many people are saying that Romeo's love of Rosaline and his quick fall for Juliet is a blemish in his character. He's saying that, basically he's bending to popular opinion on that and not trying to make some sort of comments that Shakespeare was faulty. He then gives some further information about the source texts that Shakespeare would have perhaps used. Bandello wrote I think 1535 novel. And then he also references the Caius Marius tragedy with this final bit that he's added. Caius Marius also has a deathbed conversation, but it's different from Garrick's version. So then in our next printing of the play that retains Garrick's changes, this is from 1794. And I don't have the author, the name of this, who wrote this introduction, but I've included those names when I have them. But this says, there cannot be a better subject for general entertainment than that passion which at some time in life everyone feels. On this irresistible impulse of the human heart, Shakespeare founded this piece, Romeo and Juliet. And indeed, he has painted it warmly. However, in his original play, there are many superfluities and breaches of irregularity which Mr. Garrick has, with a masterly hand, corrected. And then he goes on to give a few other points, and also gives a quote from Garrick's introduction from that previous edition. So, the kind of language of correcting Shakespeare is not language that we in our current age often employ, but there doesn't seem to be too much of a problem with saying that that Garrick has corrected Shakespeare. So in our 1819 edition, this is William Hazlitt's. He was a prominent essayist and literary and art critic in Shakespeare's day. In Shakespeare's day, in the early 1800s. He offers these remarks and celebrates that Garrick has altered Romeo and Juliet, not spoiled it, which indeed would hardly seem in the power of man to do. Again, kind of having it both ways, acknowledging Shakespeare as this canonized writer, but also saying that he's capable of being improved. To alter and not spoil. He then gives this extensive floral metaphor of that the play of Romeo and Juliet may be compared for the sweetness and colors of its poetry to a spreading rose tree. Garrick has pruned and trimmed it, has curtailed it of some of its arching branches, and lopped off some of its fairest flowers. He goes, not lopped off some of its fairest flowers. So he keeps kind of going with this this metaphor for some time. In the 1874 edition that the library has, we have another editorial introduction that begins by saying the leading incidents of the plot of this peerless tragedy are half legendary and half historical. This is where we start to get a little bit more of a kind of a scholarly approach here in the 19th century toward how we comment on works of literature. So he's saying the story is mentioned by a Girolamo della Coste in his History of Verona, but before the appearance of that work, it had been variously handled by the early Italian novelists. He talks about Luigi da Porto, published in 1535, and Bandello, 1554. Sorry, it's the Porto that's 35. I said that was the Bandello. So Bandello's is 54. And then that there were poems by Pierre Boisteau, and that Shakespeare was likely working from the tragical history of Romeus and Julius, written first in Italian by Bandello and now in English by Arthur Brooke. And then gives some quotes and is looking specifically at the Brooke poem that Shakespeare, they suppose, was working from as a source text. So as this editorial introduction, again, these start to get a little bit longer here in the 19th century with more scholarly attitudes towards the text. In the 1874, there's again, language that this is an improved version of the play. So even in its improved state, with its luxuriant poetry and passionate earnestness, it bears marks of the retention of many juvenile defects. The mature genius which produced Othello would never have made Juliet talk of the death-darting eye of cockatrice at the moment when she is all eagerness to learn if Romeo has been killed. So again, language that doesn't often enter into an English classroom today, of Shakespeare having juvenile defects or improved states of revisions and so forth. You also have down here the present stage copy of Romeo and Juliet. Is that arranged and remodeled by Garrick about the year 1748, which has been from that time to our own the preferred acting edition. In this, all allusion to Romeo's first love, Rosaline, is omitted, and the catastrophe is so altered as to conform more nearly to the traditionary account as given by Bandello. Again, kind of looking at the legacy of those source texts. He then goes on to quote the Hazlitt comment in this introduction. Says the first love of Romeo, says Hazlitt, is left out in the acting play to narrow the canvas and assist the concentration of the interest. Another good reason for the omission might have been adduced, as Rosaline nowhere appears in the play. All that relates to her is presented in a narrative and in a dramatic form. Audience must either see or believe, more attention again to this as a performed play and the public desire to have the story tightened, and Rosaline gets shunted to the side. This one continues, and we have kind of this interesting moment where Garrick, and this is kind of I think a pretty interesting moment in a 1749, 1750 season. There's kind of a rivalry of two different performances of Romeo and Juliet that are on stage in London at the same time. Garrick plays Romeo in a direct competition with an actor named Sprenger Barry, who was his former colleague and former Romeo in his 1748 production at Drury Lane. Barry has left for Covent Garden, a rival theater, and Garrick decides to take up the role of Romeo in Barry's absence and kind of go head to head with him with two concurrent productions of the play at the same time. And he says that 1749, between Garrick and Barry and Romeo, it was observed by a female critic that in the garden scene, Garrick looked with great animation and was so spirited in his gestures that had she been Juliet leaning over the balcony, she should have thought he was going to jump up to her. But that Barry was so tender, melting, and persuasive that had she been Juliet, she would have jumped down to him. So kind of a comparison between Garrick's performance of Romeo versus Barry's. So just another kind of interesting little note here with Garrick's relationship with this play. At the bottom of this one, down toward this area down here, just the final note that this editorial introduction offers is that in the present stage copy of this tragedy, many acknowledged errors have been corrected. There's that language again, and all the modern improvements in the business of the piece have been carefully noted. All right, so again, improvements and correction and errors. Again, a very different attitude towards Shakespeare than is popular today. 1882. What I think is interesting about this one is that the Garrick version of the play has become standardized, has become the accepted standard version of the play that is printed and performed to such a degree that by 1882, in this preface, the writer has to acknowledge that such changes have been made from the ordinary manner and presentation are, I think, justified. So he's changing away from the Garrick version and is saying that those changes from the ordinary manner and presentation are, I think, justified by the fuller development of our present stage, and goes on to explain that Among the restorations will be found that of Romeo's unrequited love for Rosaline, omitted amongst other things in Garrick's Georgian version. Its value can be hardly overappreciated, since Shakespeare has carefully worked out this first baseless love of Romeo as a palpable evidence of the subjective nature of the man and his passion. That's 1882. The final one that we have here at the library in our collections is from 1886, from a series of facsimile reproductions of the original texts, the original quartos that are from Shakespeare, kind of the original texts of Shakespeare, authoritative texts. So there are actually two in this series. There's the 1597 edition of Romeo and Juliet, which was kind of an unauthorized, kind of error-ridden version of the play. And then there's the 1599, which is where this introduction is from. The 1599 is the quarto edition that is used as the source text for Shakespeare's first folio and is considered to be kind of the authentic version of the play. And here by 1886, we start to see very familiar sorts of attitudes toward the authoritative text, and a search for the authoritative text, and acknowledgement and kind of charting of different textual variants within the text. So this person is talking about, this is Herbert A. Evans, an Oxford professor, who's writing about the 1597 and explains that this facsimile has been compared with the folio, and within this, as anyone who's read a Signet Classic or a classic version of a play, or a Folger, or whatever version of the play you might use, of a Shakespeare play, as you might have read in a class or teach to your students, it's got all those sorts of notations of that this facsimile has been compared with the folio. Lines differing from it have been marked with a cross, lines absent from it with a star, those kind of brackets and carets and sorts of notations that are kind of standard that we see in our versions of Shakespeare's plays today in our classroom copies. This goes on, so that's the end of the primary source materials. So now I'll kind of offer you all just some discussion prompts, and I'm happy to talk about any of these sorts of things. But comparing the two, I think, and these discussion prompts are maybe less oriented for us right now, although I'm happy to engage with them. Just thinking about how we might use these as primary sources in a classroom. Asking students to consider the impact of a Garrick kind of final conversation. Like, what does that do for our understanding of the end of the play? Does it make it more or less tragic that Romeo and Juliet have a final conversation? Kind of this attitude comparing Garrick and his adding of 67 lines of text compared to today. Directors often cut and move language when staging Shakespeare, but often directors feel a real reticence to adding a scene or changing any kind of language, and whether or not we, kind of giving students an opportunity to interrogate those practices and those sensibilities. Kind of maybe some questions about the attitude toward authors and artists, kind of that aura of the author idea that students might find interesting to think about, particularly in an era of such profound adaptation and rethinking and sampling in music and those sorts of things. What is untouchable and what can we still manipulate and enhance and make new today. The questions about the Rosaline, whether or not how that character changes or removing it, what gets gained, what gets lost there in our understanding of Romeo. And just some kind of pithy sorts of who owns the story, who has the power to decide what details belong in a story and what gets left out, why. And then I have some research suggestions about some of these different versions, and even a creative writing activity that teachers might find where they get to, where you might ask students to insert moments into the play elsewhere, and how does your 67 lines that you add to the play, how does that kind of enhance or complicate the characterization that we otherwise have in the play. So I will be happy to. We've gone just over about 30 minutes, so I'm happy to kind of turn it over to questions. All of those primary sources are available on the Rare Book Division's Bibliomania blog that we publish on about once a week. I did it back in April, a blog post about this topic, about these different editorial introductions. And those are all available as downloadable PDFs if you're interested in using them in your class. But I will kind of maybe stop sharing my screen and give folks the opportunity to offer comments or engage with what I've just said, if it's useful at all, or what feedback you have, or suggestions for how the library. I'm particularly interested in how the library can best serve educators with digitized primary sources that we do have in our collections. So I will shut up, and I will be happy to hear from anyone in the group that has thoughts.
Hi, Patrick. It's Pam. You did get some love reactions and applauds while you were speaking. I did include also the Bibliomania link in the chat, so everyone can take a look at that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Loves and applauds. That's very nice. So this is maybe evidence that I was kind of on the fence with the organizers about whether this should be a lightning session for just 10 minutes or a full scale presentation and full session. And maybe this is evidence that we should have just done the lightning session.
Well, I think there's a lot of really great comments in the presentation to think about and to apply, as far as how one is looked at and analyzes the text and the changes today. So I think that's really relevant.
I do too. I have to say, I was pretty blown away to discover this. It just seems so counter to what I had taught in my 19 years as a high school English teacher, that you can cut lines from Shakespeare, you can combine lines, combine these two lines with these two lines to make one speech by a character. You can move things around, but you can't edit language. You can't add words. You can't modernize it. And I don't know, now I'm kind of wondering why we can't. And I mean, I think I still agree with that, but I think there's something really kind of refreshing and irreverent about a version of the play that has very little compunction about adding 67 lines to the most climactic moment of the play. Emily Moore has her hand up.
Hi, Patrick.
Hi.
It's nice to see you.
Good to see you too.
That was fascinating. Thank you so much. And I just wanted to note, I feel like It's a really elegant way that you've combined a fictional text with archival inquiry. I feel like this is the kind of model that I could use in my own education in terms of having students think more broadly about how a text that presents itself as sort of finished and complete can be a little bit more complicated in that way. And having that combination of the real deep detail of Romeo and Juliet, something that most students are going to be at least relatively familiar with some of these headier questions around what gets said, what doesn't get said, who gets to decide how something gets changed and presented. It's a really beautiful combination of those two things. So thank you so much for sharing.
That's very kind. Yeah, the familiarity of the text does make it accessible. Like those bigger questions, it does make it accessible.
So I was thinking if there might be modern texts that students would recognize that we would think of as finished and complete, that maybe have parts that some people don't like, or they would like to rewrite it. And there's certainly been a lot of controversies about, like, I don't know, Ghostbusters being rewritten with all women that everyone really loathed, and then when they rebooted it again, we're just going to pretend all ladies didn't happen, right?
Mm.
That like that might be another entrance point for it, or if they, to get them to think about, like, if you could get your hands on any popular text, modern popular text, and just casually add 67 lines to fix it, like, which one would you choose and how would you justify yourself?
I love that. I love that as an exercise. And it does call to mind fan fiction, which
Yeah,
is,
that's what I was thinking too. I was like, this is like the ultimate fan fix it here. He just
yeah,
decided he didn't like it, so he was going to change it.
yeah,
Uh, Only then it got performed for 150 years as if it was the real one.
right.
Uh, so
Yeah, what a fan fiction version of, whatever novel or genre becomes, it's like, actually, we like that one better. We're
yeah,
going with that.
I mean,
That's it.
there are some fan fix-its out there that may very well be better than the source material, and
Sure.
we just, we're kind of like, you can't fix Shakespeare, but you can
Yeah.
if you want to. Why not?
Thank you.
Yeah, and just bringing, if you don't see it, Katie mentioned that she's thinking about the 1996 film of Romeo and Juliet and the modernization of different versions of these texts into films.
Yeah. So, and that's a modernization in terms of costume and set and setting. But I think that the language in the Baz Luhrmann 96 remains true to the probably the 1599 Shakespeare text, which we can recontextualize, or Hamlet can wear a kilt or he can wear a blazer. But he still has to say the same words that Hamlet said in Shakespeare's original version of the play. That's kind of our sensibility. That 96 film, I remember, like, they even go to pains where they put like a label on a gun that it's a longsword to try to give me my longsword, I think Capulet says. And it's like, okay, you have to label the gun as the longsword to retain that original language, and not change it to give me my weapon or give me my gun or whatever. To so that, again, that like maybe hypervigilance and hyper reverence for the original language. But yes, I think that we certainly have been interested in recontextualizing this language into different settings, modernization. So yeah, Katie, I think that is an interesting prompt to ask students to think about what's different between putting it in whatever that is, like Miami, in the 90s versus adding language. Like where do we draw the line between what is a modernization or a different version? Like, how does that make it different, or how does it retain something that is kind of core to the original version, or what gets lost or what gets gained? All those sorts of things are really interesting questions to me. Thank you, Katie. All right. What do you think, Pam? I think a
Yeah.
solid 40-minute effort here. People at the end of the
All
day.
great. A lot of great feedback. I think that everyone, from the comments certainly enjoyed it and learned a lot.
So my email address is phastings@loc.gov, and I am very eager to engage with teachers and um, to present materials remotely through our kind of virtual interfaces that we have here with your classes, or if there's any way that you would like to see some student classroom engagement with getting your students engaged with our primary sources, with our materials, digitized collections, and not just digitized, but the actual physical books where we can use like a document camera and show you the books that we have. I'm very eager to do that, so please don't hesitate to reach out. And otherwise, for those of you who are classroom teachers, enjoy the second half of the summer, or second, or whatever it is. Maybe you've got a quarter left, depends on when you go back. I think we're exactly halfway between Memorial Day and Labor Day. Godspeed. Good luck with planning your semesters. And if there's anything that the library can do to support your teaching, please don't hesitate to reach out. Thanks, y'all. Huh. Jane Austen, Andrew Davies. Let me check that out. All right, y'all, I'm going to go ahead and thanks, Pamela. I appreciate your support.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you.
Have a great rest of your day.
You too.